I remember David Gilmour sort of ambling up to me as we were about to launch into Arnold Lane and leaning over and saying, "You know, I've never played Arnold Lane with anybody else but Rick before. I hope you're all right."
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. This episode, I'm really thrilled to bring you the amazing Dom Beken. As you'll hear, Dom has had a massive career across film, TV, playing with a range of acts from The Orb through to one of his most recent gigs as part of the Nick Mason Saucerful of Secrets. For those of you, I think most people that listen to this or watch this are aware, Nick Mason is obviously one of the founding members of Pink Floyd and now tours with this amazing band that includes Dom performing some of those earlier albums from Pink Floyd. As you'll hear, that's one part, but we go into quite some depth on that. The other projects, Dom has some amazing insights on the industry more broadly, and so lots to enjoy in this one. So yeah, do jump in and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Dom, it's an absolute pleasure to have you, sir.
Great.
How are
Yeah,
you this
I'm good.
fine day
Really
in
good.
Spain?
Yeah, we've got the first slightly cloudy day since May, so it's a delight. The tourists are looking very unhappy, but I'm loving it.
Good. Yeah, I know you've had some serious heat over there, even by Australian standards. So yeah, no, keep cool over there. So I thought we'd start off, Dom, with just talking about your last 12 months. You've had a busy 12 months in music, to say the least. Just tell us about what you've been up to the last 12 months before we go back
With you, actually,
further.
the last 4 or 5 months I've been off dealing with a bit of a family crisis. I think I filled you in before we started recording. But so this is my first day, or first couple of days back at work, really. But tail end of last year, we finished what we think is our penultimate tour with Nick Mason and the Saucerful of Secrets, which was just, yeah, absolutely magnificent. And we finished off with a show in Frankfurt, which we really enjoyed. And we went back and I had a listen to the recording I made of, that Steve, our front of house engineer, and I made of our version of Echoes we played in Frankfurt, and thought it sounded great. So we've just released that as a single, which people seem to like, which is nice. Fantastic. Stephen Wilson mixed it. I helped him a little bit with that, but it's Stephen's fantastic ears are on the ends of the controls, so all credit to him. He's done a Dolby Atmos version of it as well, and we mastered it on a piece on vinyl that runs backwards. And I don't know if people know why that's a good thing, but the end of a piece of vinyl always sounds worse than the beginning of a piece of vinyl, because the needle is traveling more slowly in the groove.
Okay.
And it means that as you get to the center of the record, you can master less and less bass in it. So if you have a song like Echoes that starts quietly and has a big crescendo near the end, it's far better to have the needle at the outside of the record than the inside. So that's why we did. That's why we did that. And I think it's the first time a record has been released mastered that way, using a Neumann lathe at Abbey Road. There have been some other ones before. There's been some reverse vinyls before, but I think we're the first people to release something cut on a modified Neumann lathe at Abbey Road. So there you go. There's an opening bit of geekery for you all.
Love it. Yeah, no, absolutely. It certainly taught me something. And just, we are going to definitely go into Saucerful of Secrets, but you mentioned penultimate tour, and it's been fairly widely publicised. So is there an actual time frame for the final tour, or that's still yet to be determined?
Yet to be determined. Yeah, I mean, our glorious Commander-in-Chief and Professor Mr. Mason is relaxing and enjoying his summer, and although he's taking calls from us about, come on, Nick, what are we going to do next year? We've yet to put anything solid in the diary. And to be fair to Nick, you know, he's how can I put it politely? He's in the senior category. He's definitely older than most of us, and I think he's earned that right to take his time.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So, no, we will come back to that, but I want to go back to your musical upbringing. So just tell us a little bit about your earliest years as a child into adolescence and what got you into music in the first place.
I think it's it's a default thing, actually. I just spent as much of my free time as possible playing the piano that my parents were kind enough to buy and put in the living room. And my mum did decide to send me to piano lessons, but it seems that I'm slightly dyslexic when it comes to reading music. So I found as a kid, and I remember it quite clearly, that I could be given a piece of music and I would struggle to work out the first, 8 bars, but it was fairly easy to think, oh, okay, I can kind of see how this is organized. I'll just make the rest up in the same style. Drove my piano teacher round the absolute twist, but it meant that I just ended up learning pieces by ear or writing my own from a pretty young age. And that's kind of how I started. And I just always wanted to have a job in music, doing music. I never thought I would be a performer. I started out thinking I'd be a sound engineer, and I learned because I love the process of making records. So I learned to be a sound engineer up at Park Street Studios in Liverpool, which has sadly closed recently, like so many others. But I started as a sound engineer, and then I remember a session where a band called Manson brought in a whole bunch of new programming kit. They brought in a Korg Triton and a Mac and a MIDI interface, handed it over to their engineer. I was the assistant at the time, who looked at it and said, I know what to do with this. And I sort of meekly from the corner said, if you want to give me a break from making tea and emptying the bins, I can do a string arrangement on that. And so I ended up being a programmer as well.
That's amazing. Love it. And so, I mean, given you were working in a studio, what was the transition there for you?
I started working with Guy Pratt, who I met at a session in Trident Studios in the centre of London. And we got on really well. And he asked me if I'd go and do some work for him programming at his studio at Townhouse. And through Guy, I met Alex Patterson from The Orb. And Alex and I got on really well. And Alex kind of asked me to co-write some stuff for The Orb. So I sort of ended up accidentally joining The Orb that way. And Alex and I did more and more things together, started writing together. And then he asked me if I'd tour with him. So that was sort of my first exposure, really. But I didn't really, I'm not one of those keyboard players who enjoys showing off with insanely fast chops and that kind of thing. I like to make the right sound at the right place and play the right thing and support the music. So it was a long time, really, until anything much happened in terms of being a performer. I think the first big thing was that Brian Johnson from AC/DC was not with AC/DC at the time and had an idea to do a new album and to start a band. And I think it was actually, I believe it was Guy who suggested me as a keyboard player, much to my surprise. And I just happened to have a bit of free time that week. So I threw a Wurlitzer and I think another MIDI keyboard in my boot and took myself up to John Henry's and ended up jamming in a room full of fantastic musicians with Brian on lead vocals. That project didn't come to fruition. I think Brian was invited back to join AC/DC. I think the brothers decided they'd do something else. And then a short while later, Lee Harris came up with the idea of the Saucers. And I'd been invited to play keyboards at Guy's 50th birthday party, and he had a jam with loads of musicians coming along. David Gilmour came along, Gary Kemp came along, all sorts of really interesting players. But only one guy who wanted to play the organ. So that was my sort of baptism of fire. I remember David Gilmour sort of ambling up to me as we were about to launch into Arnold Lane and leaning over and saying, I've never played Arnold Lane with anybody else but Rick before. I hope you're all right. Okay, no pressure. And there is a 32-bar organ solo in the middle of this, isn't there? Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. So how did you go? You went well?
I really don't remember. It's a complete blur. I'm sure I made an absolute hash of it. I'm sure it was an absolute car crash. But I mean, they're still speaking to me,
That's amazing.
and I got to play keyboards with Nick and Gary and Guy and Lee. So
Yeah. That's right. Now, I do want, I'm not going to let you get away out of the Orb quite that early as well, because I'm a massive Orb fan and love that music from sort of the 90s into the 2000s as far as electronic music as well. So obviously that's incredibly different from what you've done since, and you've done a whole range of genres. What was the learning curve for you with the Orb? As you said, you may not be one to do lots of soloing, but that's not necessarily called for in stuff like the Orb. So just tell us about your experience with that. And was that something new for you at the time?
I was looking for a way to move live Orb shows on from the way that previous collaborators with Alex had worked, which was, essentially having a console on stage and mixing live, sort of pretty much building a mini studio. And that was around about the time that Ableton Live came out. So I was wanting to much more make the Orb experience for the keyboard player much more live, and integrate Ableton Live and remixing on the fly, along with also taking a keyboard on stage and playing some of the parts live, or getting as close to the parts on the record as I could. I mean, a lot of them were samples, so it was a question of recreating those samples with synths live on stage. So that was the route that I took with that.
And do you remember what synths you were using back then?
The thing with the Orb Live at the time was it wasn't the kind of organization that was used to taking big keyboard rigs of backline out on stage. So I really had to dine out on Ableton Live and soft synths and some controllers. So yeah, it wasn't ideal for me. It wasn't until the Saucers that I got to really play the way that I wanted to, but it was great fun, and Alex is a really dear friend and a great person to be creative with.
So, as you mentioned with Saucerful of Secrets, you've definitely got a much fuller keyboard rig, and you've got a whole palette of sounds. So, tell us about. I mean, you've alluded to Guy Pratt and David Gilmour, and I mean, I think I'm getting how you ended up joining Saucerful of Secrets, but just tell us a little bit about the formation of that and how you got involved.
It's great. I mean, it's the way we did it was the really old-fashioned way of forming a band. I mean, it really was the first 5 people that we thought of. Lee Harris became a friend of mine because Guy had him on board to help put together the musicians for his 50th birthday. So I got to know Lee through that, and we became good friends. And then Lee came up with this idea, and obviously called round, and I was on the call list, and we talked about what we could possibly do. And it really was just a question of saying, well, the only way we can take this forward is if we can persuade Nick to join us in a rehearsal studio somewhere and just thrash some stuff out. And I think when I was first approached with the Saucerful of Secrets thing, my memory of it at least is that I think they were hoping that a much more accomplished or famous keyboard player might come along, and that my role might be a lot more to be doing the sonics, the atmospheres, the samples, just to sort of be a studio whiz on the corner of the stage, making, I don't know, whooshes and beeps and stuff. But I decided to bring along a digital Hammond, having listened to the stuff, and realized that, Rick was mostly playing, Farfisas, Vox Continentals and Hammond on that material. So I grabbed a Nord C2D to bring along to the rehearsal and mostly played that. And it seemed to work, apart from the fact that it always took me longer than anybody else in the band to set up. But by the time I was up and running and could hear something, no one seemed to be like, get that guy out the room. He's hopeless. Much to my amazement. I mean,
I think you're probably vastly underestimating your skills, but as you know, too, it's as much about the hang as the actual virtuosity. I mean, you obviously fitted in well with the team. What was your learning curve there, though, Dom? As far as you obviously had a few runs on the board as far as being a player and producer, but what was there a fair ramp up in rehearsal?
Steve, I think we're all faking it, aren't we? We've all got imposter syndrome. and I've got it in
Yeah.
spades.
Oh, yeah.
But it was interesting because the difference between the Saucers going on tour and when Floyd played that original material is the massive change in technology that we have available now. But yet, when you listen to a lot of those records, particularly the psychedelic stuff, Set the Controls and those tracks, they were great sonic experimenters from the start. Yet on stage, I think the one thing that Nick especially really enjoyed was the improvisational aspect of what they did. So for me, it was really a question of trying to build a keyboard rig and a mindset around the synths and all the keyboard sounds for early Pink Floyd that allowed you to be very hands-on and very improvisational at the same time as being able to provide a really wide range of different sounds and ambiances and textures to fit in. So at one moment you're soloing, the next moment you're providing ambience and texture, the next minute you're providing a piano backing or a rhythm backing, or even just providing the nuts and bolts of the chord of the song for the guitars to sit on top of. So that's, and at the same time trying to do that without taking an enormous, studio-sized keyboard rig on stage, something that we could that the backline crew could actually cope with. I think we're at the border with that.
Yeah, and what are you actually taking out, Dom? So what was the balance you found there? Because as you can imagine, there are 1,000,001 Pink Floyd tribute acts, including an amazing one that my sometimes co-host, who's devastated, I've got to say, he's not here tonight. He had a work conflict.
In Australia, you have tribute bands better than anybody else I know, I think. It's probably slightly to do with your geography, I reckon. But so what was the question again? I got distracted.
Just purely, what is the rig that you do take out with Saucerful of Secrets? It does give you that balance between not too overwhelming.
I've got to give massive credit to my tech, Bob Stewart, who came up with the idea, because originally I wanted to combine a board of effects and kind of semi-modular sound sources so that I could both process keyboards and generate audio at the same time and really mess things around and be able to control whether I'm sending or blending any particular set of keyboards with that. And then also to be able to add digital effects as well for things that there wasn't room for in the rack. So then automatically it was kind of, okay, we're going to have to dine out on some plugins here. And the solution we hit upon was MainStage, which I've got to admit, I'm not very happy with, but it's the only piece of software. I know people will write in, there'll be comments below saying, no, you should have used this, you should have used that. There are other things out there that have that kind of routing and controllability, but they were a little bit out of my technical comfort zone. I mean, I certainly looked into using Ableton, and Ableton would have been able to do it, but I was going to have to program in, it's just dropped out of my head now. Ableton has a proprietary plugin format that you can write your own code and plugins to get routing, and the name of it has just dropped out of my head for a minute. I'm sorry. And I went down the road with it and got it working, and then thought, do you know what? If this falls over in the middle of a tour, I'm not going to remember how I did this. So Ableton so that went, and we went back to MainStage. Not a fan of it, but it does the job just about. And then I have a Nord C2D, and Nord are quite sweet and look after me. I really enjoy that. I thought it was a great bit of kit because it's 3 organs in one, and amp sims and all that kind of stuff, and all the drawbars and 2 sets of drawbars. Anybody watching this as a keyboard fan knows it inside out. Then I wanted to choose an analog synth that I thought would be super reliable and stable, but also really flexible and very hands-on. So I bought a subsequent 37, which was an update on the Little Fatty, and an update on the Sub 37, and I'm super happy with that. I still use it all the time in the studio and live. It's a MIDI controller and a great sounding synth. And then on the other side, I have a couple of controller keyboards. One is a weighted piano, which I've actually just upgraded to a Nord Stage 4, just to take the piano duties away from the laptop. And then I have a an SL Mark II, SL Mark III Novation. And again, I use a lot of gear
Nice.
from Novation and Focusrite, and the SL is great as a controller.
Yeah.
I've got all my pads for doing drum things, and I've got all my samples up there, and splits and faders for controlling stuff in Ableton, in MainStage. And then the floor is just a whole swag of pedals, controller pedals, most of which are ascends or blends or, each one goes to a different. And then on the effects board, I've got a Boss ES5 and a Boss ES8 that control, I don't know, there's 20 or 30 pedals on there, which are just chosen because they're all things that I can't find a plugin that would sound the same. And it's also hands-on control. So I get a lot of time where I get to just stand up and twiddle knobs.
No, brilliant overview, thank you. And just going back to MainStage, and I'm a MainStage user, and I agree with you totally. I'm never 100% comfortable with it. What is it you particularly dislike about it? Do you worry about reliability, just how difficult it is to set up?
So they seem to have forgotten their professional user base. For understandable commercial reasons, but whilst it is sort of loosely based on eMagic Logic that we remember and love, that functionality is now buried so deeply behind all the pretty pictures and shortcuts for press one button, have instant techno nonsense for the quite genuine and perfectly acceptable world of semi-professionals or amateurs at home that like fiddling. But why can't we have some professional software?
Yeah, here. I'm hearing you. And just on that, what are the soft synths that you are using? I mean, it sounds like you've got pretty much most stuff covered with hardware, but you mentioned about samples. So aside from samples, are there some soft synths that are fundamental to your work?
Not
sources?
really, to be honest with you. There are a few things that crop up every now and again for certain things. I still like Spectrasonics Omnisphere. I think that's a great little tool for quickly getting pads, and particularly now that it's got so many really nice emulations of analog gear, it does that nicely, but it's heavy on the processor. I think there's a little bit of Native Instruments Massive on one of the tracks. Do you know what?
Yep.
Without actually going back in and looking, those are the two that spring to mind. I tend to use a lot of Spitfire strings, that kind of stuff.
And what's your redundancy, Dom? So, do you have a second laptop if things fail, or you've got enough coverage on the hardware? Obviously, samples would be an issue, but you've got enough coverage on the hardware. If it goes down, you can survive?
This is my nightmare. This is my absolute production nightmare because... I designed the rig, and then our production team took one look at it and went, so what happens when the laptop crashes? And I said, well, it all goes off until I restart it. So they said, all right, well, you'll need a completely redundant system. So I basically have, apart from the physical keyboards, there is a completely redundant system that operates all the time. So there's two laptops. There's two... Focusrite Red 8 Pre's. There's I use up until now I've been using DI boxes and switches by a company called Orchid, and Peter there used to make them all. They were all hand built and incredibly good value, and they sound amazing. As far as I'm aware, I think he's pretty much semi-retired now. So I've got a horrible feeling that on the next tour I might move over to Radials for that side. But yeah, no, there's a completely redundant system.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, the Radial KL8 sounds like an ideal solution for you with the switch over for laptops and stuff. But yeah, Radial, I'm a fan. But no, that's amazing. I don't think I have. Aside from any highlights over the time with Saucerful of Secrets, as far as gigs you've played that have really stood out for you, or and also I'd probably throw in the train wreck question here. So has something gone spectacularly wrong that you can look back and laugh about now?
There's a couple. There are a couple of things. I did have a slow motion train wreck that went on over about 4 or 5 gigs, where originally I had an Oberheim MC1000 controller keyboard with weighted keys, which I'd had for years and I really liked. And one night I was playing Fearless, which is piano-led, and I'm like, well, hang on a minute. I'm playing the piano and I'm getting loads of stuck notes, and they're coming a second or 2 or 3 seconds after I'm playing them. So over the next 5 gigs, this kept happening, and Bob was tearing his hair out, looking at the computers, trying to work out where the stuck notes were. You know, did we not have enough RAM? Were the computers too hot? We couldn't figure out, but then it was happening on both machines simultaneously. And finally, after about 4 or 5 gigs, we realized that it was the keyboard itself. And it was after the 5th gig where I was playing the piano solo, I think in either in Fearless, or what was the other one we used to play that had a piano solo in it? We've dropped it now. And there was me happily soloing along. And all of a sudden there was a moment of silence, and then the world's most enormous clusterfuck of notes, as if I'd just fallen on top of the piano.
Oh, it sounds like some sort of MIDI delay or something.
I don't know, Bob will tell you, the keyboard was buffering some stuff up or storing stuff and then squirting it all out later. I was really tempted to get up, throw the whole keyboard rig on the floor and march off stage in a hissy fit. But luckily, just doing side-eye with my tech in the wings, like, and him going, was enough to kind of keep me there. But the other one was a bit of a classic. If anyone's seen the show, at the beginning of Echoes, the stage goes into complete and utter darkness. There's a total blackout, and then I have to play the ping, the sonar ping, the piano through a Leslie speaker. And one night, you know, we get a blackout, there's total silence. The audience are like, oh, we know what's coming next. It's Echoes. And I went to play that B, and I could see nothing. Somehow I just looked at the keyboard, and I literally was just reaching into the dark. And I just managed to play a really interesting jazz chord of, I think, 3 semitones all next to each other instead of the ping.
Nice.
So for every gig since then, at the beginning of Echoes, Bob crawls across the stage on all fours, commando style, appears under my keyboard with a little gooseneck lamp and places it over B8 on the keyboard.
Wow.
That's dedication.
Yeah, he's a great tech. No, I love it. Amazing stories. Thanks, Dom. And I will ask one last question, which was, are there some songs for you that you particularly enjoy playing out of that amazing catalogue? You know, what really keeps you interested to this day?
Every band I've played in and every show, there's always a song in the set list that you go, oh, it's this one. All right, just buckle up and get through it. And the thing I love about the Saucers is there isn't one of those in the set. Not a single one. We kind of have a rule in the band that if anybody in the band doesn't like a song, it gets dropped. It does make putting the set lists together murder sometimes, and it can take a lot of debate amongst the 5 of us.
Yeah.
But there are moments that are a bit special. Obscured by Clouds is just great. It's one of those early songs that Rick really let the synthesizers breathe on it, and, you know, you get to be epic and expansive. And Echoes is another really special moment. It's one of those, it's very weird. The first time we played it, I started and played the ping, and the first little bit of the song is me on my own, which is lovely. And I remember just playing these arpeggios at the keyboard like Rick played, and then looking at the front of the audience, and there were one guy and 2 women sitting right in front of me, absolutely pouring with tears. And I was like, shit, what's gone wrong? What's the matter? What's the matter? So I looked across at Barry, our head of security. I'm like, he comes over, what's the matter? What the fuck's going wrong? These people in the front row are sick. They're not well. Can somebody go down and check what's gone wrong? No, they're just really enjoying themselves. They're really emotional. Oh my God, amazing.
See, that's your imposter syndrome kicking in again, Dom. That's what that was. No, I love it. And you just raised a really interesting point, and this is obviously a faulty assumption. I think it's amazing that the 5 of you determine your set list within reason and what songs, and if someone doesn't like a song, it drops. I'd assume, because obviously Nick being one of the original members, that it might have been, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but more of a dictatorship as far as here's what we're doing. So it's great that there's some good collaboration.
I think it's fair to say, and I don't think Nick would disagree, that he just really enjoys playing in a band, and I think that he misses I think he misses that period of Floyd where they got on really super well and they collaborated as a, as a band, as a four-piece, or short while as a five-piece. And he's really a collaborative player, and I think it's also the essence of his drumming. He's not one of those drummers or percussionists that plays, insanely crazy fast fills, but he's unbelievably musical. And what he loves is reacting to what everybody else is playing and supporting the music with those, those phenomenally melodic tom fills. And I think that really is his jam. And so that's why it was the first five people we got in a room who got on together, and it's the same five people now. And we had an issue. I won't tell the story, but we did have an issue on the first tour where it was possible that one of the five of us wouldn't be able to make the shows in Canada. We huddled together in the pre-production rehearsals. We were already in Washington by that point, in Washington State. And we huddled together as a band and said, well, what are we going to do if we can't take one of us to Canada? Can somebody else cover the parts? And the answer was yes, but no man left behind. It's all five of us or none of us.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of band. Gary and Guy have been friends for years and years and years. They're very close mates. I've known Guy since 1999, and we've become very, very close as well. He's become a really good friend, and so has Lee over these past few years. And that's what makes it a lot of fun. I think that's why when you come to see us, we look like we're having fun on stage, because we just love being together. We love playing together.
That's right. That's right. No, amazing. No, thank you for that. Now, I am desperate to get on to KillerStar as well, because this was a revelation. I'll admit that I was unaware of KillerStar until doing research, and it's been an absolute revelation. I shall let you talk about it. Dom, tell us about what KillerStar is.
It's not my project. This was started by Rob Fleming and James Sedge. And I didn't know Rob or anything about him or James before they approached me. But James had been writing stuff and playing in bands for years, and he also has a record label, Vintage League Music, which is based both in the US and in the UK. And he puts out a lot of great indie music on there as well. He's an absolute music lover and a great songwriter, vocalist and guitarist as well. When we toured, managing to take large chunks of people with that David Bowie association with us, and it worked great. And I only got to be involved because Rob and James came to see a Saucerful show. I think they came to the Royal Albert Hall, and they literally pinged me a message through a website. And it was one of those things where actually I was on a holiday at the time and just decided to go through all the junk mail I had, and I thought that one's interesting. I wonder if that's real or not. And James and I got in contact, and the rest is history. But yeah, to play with those guys is incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And so from a keyboard viewpoint, I can't avoid asking, and we've had the absolute privilege of having Mike Garson on the show. We talked to him for about 90 minutes.
Man.
He was amazing. Just tell us.
He really is.
Yeah. Yeah, so tell us about the sort of interaction there, and even playing live, how you guys worked out what you were doing. Yeah, I'm just fascinated,
Mike's
obviously,
real thing
by that.
is the piano. So generally speaking, he does piano duties, and I do anything that's not piano duties, really. But it's still one of those bands where we are playing relatively small venues. It's loud on stage. We don't have in-ears all around. There's still wedges around the place. So it's, from my point of view, it's still very much in the process of being refined, and each gig gets better and better. We're putting out an EP of the show we did in New York in November, and I think that's the best performance the band have done so far.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I'm assuming it's the 100 Club one, the Children of the Revolution single that's been released. I mean, I'm just in a cover band, Dom, but I've already said that to our bandmates, saying that's how that should be played. We should be playing that. So I'll be linking to all that, but it is absolutely amazing. I assume you managed to drill Mike for some anecdotes around playing with David. I know he gave us lots of great stories, and I can only imagine how many he has.
I haven't actually had time to sit down with Mike and to drill him for anecdotes.
Yeah.
Well, we've had so many other things music-wise to talk about. So on the odd occasion, we've had time out of
which is
rehearsals or
better.
before a gig to go and grab a bite or a glass of beer together. We're too busy talking keyboards, piano, and music. And
That's good.
I always, also, I don't know about you, but I find it difficult to when you meet people whose work you're a
Yeah.
big fan of, apart from anything else, and they've played with some of your heroes. Literally, it's sometimes quite difficult to find the right moment to start plugging them for stories.
It is.
I know people who are better at it than I am,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a difference between being a colleague and a
well, I
fanboy,
don't know.
and
I
you're
know
absolutely right.
people
It's a
who
difficult one
manage
to
to balance
navigate.
that very well, much better than I do. I mean, my friend Guy has got more anecdotes than I've ever had breakfasts. But stick to your knitting, Grandma. That's not my thing. But if you want anecdotes, he's your man,
Yeah,
and he gets them out of everyone.
yeah, he does. I've watched some of the interviews with guys. Well, yeah, look, he's an amazing raconteur, that's for sure. No, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, KillerStar will definitely be linking to, and I know we're a little bit short on time, but I was also keen to talk about sort of even other projects you're involved in, like Belka and Strelka, Just Jack, and stuff like that. Any comments you make about that stuff from sort of the early 2000s? And
So this is the other thing that somehow has disappeared into the annals of history, because at the same time I had a band with Alex called High Frequency Bandwidth, and we put out quite a lot of stuff with that project. And at that period of time, I had a studio in Ealing Film Studios, and I was doing a lot of film and TV work, and we were kind of making some bread and butter doing television advertising as well. And my partner in crime in that business was a guy called Ant Adams, who's a fantastic musician, really great composer as well, a genius at sync music and covering other genres. And we both had a love of hip hop beats and jazz, and the idea came up. Well, look, whenever we've got some spare downtime, let's write some tunes together. And the Belka and Strelka album came out of it. But it was at a time when music sales weren't great. Record companies didn't have a huge amount of money to promote. We weren't really in a position to tour, so it's one of those little hidden gems that I'm still quite proud of. Belka and Strelka. And High Frequency Bandwidth sort of suffered a similar kind of thing. I'm still really pleased with that record. We had a fantastic guest vocalist on it in the form of MC Dynamax, who's back out in the States now. It was just a really nice period, and that studio had a great vibe, and we had some really cool people around.
yeah, nice. No, thank you. And then I do want, you've mentioned film and TV again, and I know you've got quite a credit list there as far as film, TV, and gaming. So I mean, two parts of that. What got you into that in the first place, but also the challenges, and you mentioned sync licensing and stuff as well, how I believe that's dropped off just even in the last year due to AI and a bunch of other challenges.
It's changed a lot, and my role in it has changed a lot. My approach to it, which I think in the end led me to not having quite as much work as I would have liked to have done, has a lot to do with the fact that I hate dining out on presets and everything being in the box. If anything feels too easy to me, I will find a way to make it more difficult. And to make it more creative and more interesting, and to have, fewer samples, fewer quick VST fixes to things, in an industry that was developing in a way that other composers were able to, if they got a brief for something, they'd knock out 7, 8, 9 ideas. And commissioners love that. Whereas I would say, no, this is what I really think you should have. And, I would play guitar on it, and I would play bass on it, and I would put up my drum kit and mic it up and play drums on it, and then I would ask players to come in and put strings on it or whatever it needed. And that always is my approach to everything, really. And I'm not very good at that stack it high, flog it cheap, sorry, that sounds like I'm being really bitchy about other composers. I'm not. I just don't have that ability to take one brief and knock out 7, 8 ideas for somebody to choose from. I'd much rather work, most successful things I've done, but when I've been working with a director, or a creative lead who said, look, I trust your instinct on this. What should it be? And okay, then we do go back and make changes, but always a development of the original idea. Usually, I mean, there are times when you sit back and your quality control circuit kicks in and you say, no, that needs ditching and we'll start again. But I much prefer working, really closely with a creative to, if you're doing stuff that's audio visual. And this is why I ended up in video games. I find those guys are really easy to work with, and are really happy to have creative discussions and to let people take ownership of their part of the project. And I think it's the thing I love most about video game work. As I mentioned to you before the interview, I've kind of had the last 6 months off. So it's a funny time to do an interview and talk about what I'm doing at the moment because I'm just restarting all that. But I actually do a lot of work with a company that I helped found. I'm a founding member called Snapfinger Click. And we do really nice social gaming. We've got quite a few projects ongoing with them. And they're a super team of people, make really fun games, the kind of stuff that is not a kid in their bedroom just all night shooting people in the face. They're much more collaborative, and that's a really fun area to work with. And I have been talking to a couple of other studios about some bigger AAA style projects, which two of which I haven't been able to take off and start work on in the last 6 months. But I'm hoping there's going to be some more of that because I quite enjoyed doing orchestral and drum crossover stuff and that kind of dramatic score and sound.
Are you finding it's still too early days that AI is heavily impacting that more collaborative, creative stuff?
AI has the ability to recreate and copy anything which is very generic. And I mean, the only hope I have for composers and producers like me is that because we're always pushing the boundary and trying to make things more difficult and trying to be more creative and come up with new sounds, new ways of doing things, that the sort of work that composers and producers like I do is more difficult for AI to copy. But it is a serious problem, and like all these things, I'm waiting for the public to pick up on what companies like Spotify in particular and Daniel Ek in person are trying to do, both to our creative industries and to our military and to our wider world. If you have a Spotify account, whether you pay a monthly fee or whether you put up with the adverts, you are directly contributing to the destruction of music as we know it and the creative industries, and you're directly contributing to the development of AI and warfare as well. And I think that is a despicable way to run technology. And I really think that consumers have to have a choice and to step away from that.
Given that you're sort of, let's say you're halfway through your career, maybe you've got another 20 or 30 years in the industry, if you can cope that long, Dom, what advice would you give to aspiring musicians who are just starting out and trying to establish themselves in what's now an increasingly challenging industry?
That's really difficult. I think it's very difficult in the sense that for a while, music ceased to be something that people paid for. And we're coming out the other side of that in that people are now putting their hands in their pockets to pay for subscription services. But we've got a long battle ahead of us to challenge the way those subscription services distribute that income. And that goes for all of them, not just Spotify. But the one piece of advice I would say is that you've got to be flexible and you've got to be able to turn your hand to all sorts of different things. And I think problem solving is the key thing. If ever you get an opportunity to do something, don't ever say you can't do it. Just sit down and figure out your way to do it. And it's why, I've ended up with a career where if it's to do with audio, pretty much, once you've invested in your studio, your setup, even if it's just a laptop, that's going to be expensive, and an interface. I will do anything. I do sound design for video games. For Snapfinger Click, I still will record voiceover and that kind of stuff for them. It's tedious, but someone's got to do it. And anything I've been asked to do, big gulp and that kind of weird pit in your stomach of, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And then sit down and figure out how you can do it. I mean, if you've got ears and some musical skills, and that's your, that's your jam, figure it out.
Yeah. No, great guidance. Thank you. And we also ask all our guests to tag a keyboard player. So is there a keyboard player out there, Dom, that you've admired that you would actually like to find out more about their story?
I didn't get any prior notice of this. The players that I'm really interested in are synthesists who've done really interesting things with using keyboards to create new types of music. So I've always been massively inspired by, Vangelis and Jean-Michel Jarre, Isaiah Tomita, Thomas Dolby, absolutely.
Yes.
But there's a lot of people whose chops I really admire, but they're not players that whose jobs I'm ever going to steal. And I've had an absolute brain fart, which is really horrible. If I ever meet the man, he'll kill me for this. The guy who plays for Jamiroquai, who has played for Jamiroquai,
Matt Johnson. Yeah,
Matt Johnson. Thank you.
Oh yeah, we've actually had the pleasure pre-video days. We've had the pleasure of talking. Matt is an absolute gem. He's an absolute gem.
And weirdly enough, one of the guys who was the biggest influence on me, and I had the privilege of working with him in the studio, was Rick Wright.
I was about to ask you whether you'd actually run across Rick.
I was really lucky. Rick was looking for somebody to help him rebuild his home studio a few years before he passed away, and my number was passed over. So I got to spend a reasonable amount of time with Rick on the last projects, sadly unfinished, that he was working on. But his piano style and his way of interjecting jazz voicings into rock and ambient music were just quite incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. He had a real knowledge and understanding of the way people like Miles Davis put together harmony and put that into what he was doing for Pink Floyd. And I think without Richard on those records, Pink Floyd would never have been the band they were. And the fact that he was the quiet one, and he didn't scream and shout and push himself to the front, means that he's chronically overlooked as an artist and as a composer, and just some of the chord sequences he came up with are monstrous. I mean, even going back to the song "Saucerful of Secrets," that is just insane. And I still spend time every now and again sitting down trying to analyze that and think, so how do you decide that is the movement you're going to make? He was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, and a big influence. Both his organ playing and his piano playing.
No, absolutely. No, yes. No, thank you. And we're on to our second last question. This is one I did warn you about, which is the Desert Island Disc. So if you have to rattle off 5 albums that have had a big impact on you, what would they be?
Here's a strange one, which definitely should be in my 5 Desert Island discs. Money Mark's Keyboard Repair, the original version. Money Mark, who was the keyboard player with the Beastie Boys. And if you haven't heard, I think the original has been deleted from most streaming services because he re-recorded it and niced it up. But the first version was a fantastically lo-fi, recorded at home on what sounds like a cassette deck in one take practically, or at the very most a Tascam 4-track or something like that. That's an awesome album. I love it. Very unfashionably, or this is very uncool, it's very uncool, but I got into Pink Floyd because of Dark Side of the Moon. And I won't have it said that it isn't their best piece of work ever, even though I don't get to play it. I love all the other stuff, and I love playing the stuff that led up to it. But I think it stands out amongst their back catalogue by a country mile. And I know that I should say I'm into something much more obscure by them, and I love Obscure by Clouds, the album. I love Metal. I love A Saucerful of Secrets. I don't love Amagama. Sorry. What can I say? What can I do? I'm uncool. I'm sorry. So I've got 2. I'm just
it's great.
Am I allowed a classical one? I mean, am I allowed to say that I
Please,
keep
yeah.
going back and listening to Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber? And I'll never forgive
Yeah,
whoever it
nice.
was who decided to put a dance beat behind it and play it all on synthesizers. Who was that? Who was it?
I can't remember, but I know what you mean. I
Yeah,
know the version you
that
mean.
hurts my ears. That hurts my ears almost as much as the fact that I was sitting in a bar in Mallorca a couple of nights ago and I heard a country and western version of Comfortably Numb. That also, whoever did that should
Yeah, that
apologies
was
to
more
all the
efficient
other
than some.
artists
That was good.
whose albums I absolutely adore as well. But I'm trying to think of ones that are synth heavy. So
Yeah, no, well done. No, great job. And our very last question, Dom, is what we call our quick fire 10. So just 10 really short and sharp questions with 10 really short and sharp answers. So first album you recall hearing as a
Michael
child that had
Jackson
an
off the
impact
wall.
on you or you remember?
Quincy Jones.
What's the most important pre-gig ritual for you? So let's use Saucerful of Secrets as the band. What do you need to do to feel
A
settled
third of
before
a
you
glass
start a
of white
gig?
wine in honor of Rick Wright. Always, last thing I do before I go on stage.
Nice.
Just a third
Love
of a
it.
glass. Rick always had a glass of wine before he went on stage. I always have a third of a glass of white wine.
Good job. If you hadn't been a musician, Dom, what do you think
I
your
hadn't
career
been a
choice would have
musician.
been?
Oh, my favourite answer to that question was Peter Crouch. Somebody once said to him, "If you hadn't been a footballer, what would you have been?" And he said, "A virgin."
Well, just say that.
I've no idea. It was one of those things where I just really had no choice. My my dad, who I lost quite recently, never did what he really wanted to do for a job in his life. I think he'd have been really happy in something like motor racing as an engineer, and he didn't. And I always said,
Yeah.
I want to be much happier than my dad, and therefore, I want to do
Yeah.
what I want to do for a living. I want my, my passion to be my job. So the answer is, I don't know. If I wasn't a musician, unemployed.
Yeah. Great.
An unemployed
Yeah,
virgin.
or a
Yeah.
virgin, or both. So that's right. There's your next project name, Dom. You can get that for me for
Now
free.
already.
So favorite tour, favorite tour you've ever done, if that's possible.
I would favorite tour. To be honest with you, it was the 2023. Saucerful did a fairly short European tour, and
Yep.
in it we did Pompeii, Matera. These amazing amphitheaters in Italy, which were just phenomenal. I think that was some of the most fun I've had.
That's
Much
amazing.
easier to tell you about the worst tours I've ever done, but anyway. I love playing in Italy because we get such a diverse crowd there, I have to say. But one of the most interesting things was on our 2021 tour, if I've got 2 minutes, we actually booked to play in Russia. The
Yeah.
Saucerful of Secrets were booked to play the Kremlin in
Wow.
Moscow and the Grand Theatre in St. Petersburg. And suddenly the president of that country turned out to be the world's biggest cunt. And so we immediately decided not to go there. Well, it's something, because he's got competition now as well. He's got a lot of competition. But at the time, he was head and shoulders above everybody
He
else.
does.
So we immediately cancelled a big chunk of the tour, and we ended up playing Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania instead. And that was absolutely
Wow.
fascinating because those countries were banned from hearing Pink Floyd and were banned from hearing any popular rock and roll music
Yeah.
until after Perestroika, until the 80s. And so their approach to music is popular music is all new. It's Pink Floyd isn't old to them. It's new because they weren't allowed to hear it. So the reaction of those crowds was incredible. And we were kind of playing this 50-year-old music, but as far as they were concerned, it was contemporary because they'd been banned from hearing it, up until relatively recently. So,
Yeah. No, that's an amazing pick. And I do want to say we are very swearing supportive on this podcast. So swearing's not an issue at all. And I'd like to congratulate you as the first guest that's ever dropped the C-bomb. So there you go. You've broken some new ground there. That's
sorry.
great.
I'm sorry. I once accidentally
that's
did
fine.
that
No issue at all.
in a corporate
no-
meeting with some very senior people at a very big video game company in America. And the reaction was bad.
No, definitely not a bad reaction here. A favourite music documentary or movie, Dom, that you'd
Oh, well, I've
like
already
to go
told
back
you
to
that
if
I
you get the
love Dark
chance?
Side of the Moon, so everyone knows I'm not cool, and so I've probably watched the Beatles documentary about 7 times.
This is the
Correct.
letter
Yeah.
B one, the whole 8 hours. Yep. Yep. Good pick. Name one thing you'd like to see invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier.
Wireless audio.
Yeah.
The end
Yeah.
of cable.
Good pick. No, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. There's a long one. Yep. No, agree. And last but not least, your favourite non-musical activity or hobby.
cook
What
for
keeps you
people.
sane outside of
I
music?
love cooking for people. Yeah, that's my thing.
There you
Or
go.
messing about on boats, but I'm not really wealthy enough to have the amount of boat playing time I'd really like. So, yeah, if I'm not on a boat, cooking for people, or cooking on a boat.
Yeah, that's right. Tom, I cannot thank you enough. It's been absolutely amazing. And I know you need to duck off in a minute, so I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know Saucerful of Secrets,
We
you toured
did.
Australia only in the last couple of years, didn't you? I didn't get to see it, but yeah.
Yeah,
So hopefully you're back at some stage for what is the
we'll
ultimate
see.
tour.
I mean, I guess everybody will
It's
understand
hard.
that Nick kind of feels that if we do go out again,
Yeah, it's
we'd
hard.
like it to be kind of easy and a little less travel heavy. And,
Yeah.
and I would
Yeah,
love
and
to be
Australia's
down. I
not
mean, I'd
great
like
for
to
that
do
at
New
all.
Zealand because my mum was from New Zealand, so I'm half Kiwi. So I've never got to play there. So if anybody wants to hire me to do an Australia and New Zealand tour, I'm up for it. I've got my New
Please.
Zealand
Yeah.
passport. I'm allowed in.
Yeah, look, it sounds like a good outing for the unemployed virgins. But no, Dom, thank you so much. Yeah, can't thank you enough for your insights. It's hugely
Definitely, yeah. It's been a
appreciated,
real
and
pleasure
we'll
to
keep
talk.
in touch.
Let me know when it pops out, and you have to put the parental advisory on
Yeah.
it.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I enjoyed recording it with Dom. Huge thanks to Dom for his time. He's had one hell of a few months, and it's hugely appreciated him spending the time to give us his insights. I just want to give a quick shout out to our gold and silver supporters. So the amazing Mike from midnightmastering.com. If you've got your own creations and want a great job on having them mixed and mastered, then Mike's your guy. Do check out midnightmastering.com. The amazing Dave Bryson team at the musicplay.com forums, and particularly the Keyboard Corner. As I always say, being there over 20 years and proud to do so, is such a valuable wealth of information and just a nice community. The amazing Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, Tammy, for your ongoing and long-term support. It's hugely appreciated. And last but definitely not least, the brilliant Dewi Evans, musician extraordinaire from the sunny land of Wales. Thank you, Dewi, as always, for your support as well. If you'd like to keep in touch or give us feedback, we remain on all the socials, so Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky when I think to use it, even on TikTok here and there, and also good old-fashioned email at editor@keyboardchronicles.com. We love hearing your feedback, and we also do get lots of feedback on our YouTube channel. We try and respond to each and every one of those pieces of feedback. So, yeah, that's always appreciated. So again, thank you. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but in the meantime, keep on playing.